social anxiety that I used to have in terms of going into a group of people, and that disappeared for me almost overnight. You would think that that would be something that you have to kind of build yourself up to.
When you are chronically deficient in testosterone, your actual ability to recover from and resist stress diminishes because testosterone is the primary glucocorticoid receptor antagonist. When you do put testosterone back in, that confidence and stress resilience and ability to actually go into a social situation that you know would usually give you anxiety, but be able to resist that is again because on the cellular level, your body's actual ability to resist stress has been restored.
Hello again, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about our personal experiences on TRT, how we got started, why we started TRT, and a little bit about what it feels like when you actually start for the first time, some of the issues you might experience, and hopefully some of the benefits as well when you first get on TRT, and also longer term after you've been on TRT for a year or two. So Tom, do you want to start off with a little bit about yourself and why you felt like you needed to start TRT in the first place?
Yeah, so unlike most people, I had a very clear cause for my low testosterone. I took a blow to the nether regions and that caused something called a testicular torsion. And for those who aren't aware, probably make you cringe, but it's where your testes actually twist around themselves and it cuts off the blood supply. That can lead to local ischemia and damage to the tissues, which in turn can lead to impairment to their function and by proxy testosterone production. So that happened when I was about 18, had to go in for surgery. I was perfectly healthy before that, no problems whatsoever. A few months after the surgery, I just noticed all of a sudden that motivation was declining. I wasn't really recovering from the gym anymore. Just mood in general was a little bit low. And then a few months after that, I started to develop erectile dysfunction, but more so disappearance of my sex drive. And, you know, for an 18-year-old guy, that is very abnormal, very, very abnormal. I went to my GP like most young men would, and they tested my testosterone levels, thankfully. I think that they were very hesitant to do that because of my age, but because of my history, they did it. And my levels came back within range, but right at the very, very bottom. I think from recollection, I was about 10, 11 nanomole per litre, so below the British Society for Sexual Medicine guidelines. But because I was within range, I was told that it had nothing to do with testosterone and it was all psychosomatic in nature, and I was just depressed.
Well, that's the crazy thing, isn't it? You had an obvious cause and all of the symptoms, but they still were just like, oh, 10 nanomoles per litre, that's fine because it's above 8.4 nanomoles per litre, which is what it says on the lab report, even though the lab reference range has nothing to do with symptoms at all.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you know, there exist medical guidelines like the BSSM guidelines that state that levels below 12 can be classified as hypergonadism, as low testosterone. And even then, my GP was very much trying to steer me in the direction that I was just depressed and I needed to take some sertraline and forget about all my problems, essentially. So I think a lot of men can empathize with that. I think the vast majority of men that end up coming to us have been through that same process of just knowing there's something inherently wrong with them. They don't feel good. They've got the symptoms. The blood tests show that they're essentially low, but not low enough to be below range. And they're rejected and made to feel like their symptoms are in their head or that they're crazy for thinking that testosterone could be the cause.
Yeah, or even worse, that they're just trying to get testosterone for free so that they can bodybuild or something like that.
Yeah, especially
another common one we hear.
Especially if one of the symptoms they report is that their performance in the gym has gone down or they're gaining weight or whatnot. And the GP, the vast majority of GPs, I shouldn't speak in absolutes, but will immediately associate that with, this person, you know, anabolic steroids, testosterone. No, it's just depression.
Well, I mean, my initial kind of story of realizing I had low testosterone was quite similar, apart from I didn't have an obvious physiological cause, but I was, you know, I had all of the same symptoms. And I was struggling at work. I was working as a physio in the NHS and I was really struggling at work, unable to basically stay awake. I had insomnia. I'd had that for quite a few years, but it was worse and worse. So even though I was knackered all day and I was yawning all morning and basically propped myself up with loads of coffees all day long, despite that, I couldn't sleep by the time I got to bed. I'd been regularly exercised, similarly to you, Tom. You know, I was going to the gym 6 days a week and then just suddenly I just couldn't. I was dragging myself to the gym, like just dragging myself there. and I couldn't do anything. I remember just sitting down on the bench halfway through a gym session and being completely knackered. And I was like, what is going on? Why have I got no energy at all? Doesn't make any sense. Mood was all over the place. I was like a grumpy old man, basically. You know, felt rough the whole time. And I was losing muscle and putting on fat at the same time. So it was starting to look terrible. But at the same time, you know, if I'd walked into a GP and it tried to explain these symptoms to them, I'm sure they would have looked at me and said, you're quite big. You obviously go to the gym, so you don't have low testosterone. And that's something we hear so often, because really the guys who are actually aware of this issue most often are the guys who go to the gym, because they know what testosterone is. They're aware of steroids and they know about TRT and all that kind of stuff. I think there's a correlation, and that probably doesn't actually help in some ways, because the people who go in to see the GPs are probably the ones who look like they go to the gym. And obviously GPs associate testosterone with guys who want to put on muscle. And that's it, really. Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like we had very similar kind of symptoms before we started. Mine was different in that I didn't actually go to a GP. One of my friends recommended a company, got blood tests from them. I had very similar levels to you. I think I had 10 nanomoles per litre total, and my free was like 0.17 nanomoles per litre, which is pretty low, and I couldn't wait to get started on treatment. Within about 6 to 8 hours of having my first injection of Sustanon, I did it in my quad, which was a terrible idea because I then cycled to work, which was like quite a long, it was about an hour cycle to work in the morning at like 6 in the morning in the cold. By the time I got to work, I could barely walk on my leg. The amount of post-injection pain that I had was pretty bad, actually. And I was like, this is quite a lot. But I'd done it in my quad because I thought that'll be a lot easier than doing it in my glute for the first time. So anyway, I got to work, and by about 6 hours or 4 or 5 hours after my injection, I felt great. I felt myself again, like quite energetic, and, you know, I had confidence, and I wasn't sleepy at all. Felt amazing. I don't know if that's just placebo or if it's because the propionate and the Sustanon really kicked in that quickly.
I think it's probably a mixture of the both. A lot of people will say things like, you will not notice anything from testosterone because, one, it takes 5 to 6 weeks to build up in your system, and two, because it acts through genomic pathways. The androgen receptor alters the expression of genes, and that can take quite a while. It's not a process that you notice immediately. But what a lot of people don't understand is the androgen receptor, or receptors in general, are only one mechanism through which hormones alter our physiology. And there are numerous review papers about the non-genomic actions of steroid hormones. And even if you look at in vitro studies, you can notice changes to physiology within seconds of applying any steroid hormone to a tissue, even if said tissue has been genetically modified to not express the receptor. So whilst the bulk of the changes that you will see do take time, and it is a treatment that the effects build, you can still notice things straight away. So it's probably a mix of both.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't feel like a placebo. It felt like suddenly I was like, okay. And then for the next several weeks to months, I felt very, very similar, which I think is quite common when you first start TRT in particular. But as you said, perhaps it has almost an immediate impact as soon as, because it's obviously absorbed into your blood fairly quickly, particularly the propionate with an intramuscular injection. So you'd imagine that could go around your bloodstream and impact your brain.
Yeah, it's thought to be due to testosterone's potentiation of dopaminergic transmission. So it can rather quickly increase the amount of dopamine that's within your central nervous system with dopamine. Some people call it the feel-good hormone. Current research is pointing towards it not being feel-good per se, but more so motivation and reward. It's what drives you to do things that you know are productive and good for you in the long run, even if they're hard. So it helps you to just go out and actually execute on your goals instead of sitting at home and being rather low energy, or just having no actual desire to go out and try and pursue whatever sex you're interested in, or try and get that promotion at work, or go to the gym or whatnot.
So did you inject when you first started treatment, Tom, or did you use something
I did.
else?
So unfortunately, when I started treatment, I've been on TRT about 5 years now. This space is so new, it's evolving so rapidly that even just within those 5 years, current treatment protocols have changed enormously. So when I started, I was placed on 250 milligram of Sustanon every 2 weeks, which, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this know, is extraordinarily ineffective for numerous reasons that I'm sure we'll cover in a different video at some point. I was administered a 1 milliliter injection into my outer quadricep in the doctor's office with a 21 gauge harpoon. Yeah, it was
Standard NHS model.
I had
needle,
and I had the exact same post-injection pain to the point that as I was leaving the doctor's office, walking to the train station, I just noticed my leg going deader and deader and deader to the point where I was actually sat on the train and I couldn't even feel my outer quadricep anymore. Just because, for those who don't know, the first time you inject into a muscle, it usually triggers a bit of an inflammatory response anyway that does attenuate over time. The larger the needle you use, the larger the volume of liquid you use, and then the type of liquid too, with Sustanon being particularly bad for post-injection pain due to the propionate ester and also the high benzyl alcohol content, all of those summated to essentially cripple me for a day or two. So that was my first.
Yeah, I mean, I was the same. I really struggled to cycle home after work and I was hobbling around work. It was like having the worst dead leg I've ever had.
Yeah.
So I didn't inject into the quad again after that.
I actually carried on injecting into my outer quadricep for about 2 years, but I switched to 29 gauge insulin syringes when I moved to daily injections. It wasn't too bad, still not pleasant. Again, I'm sure we'll come on to this, but it's much worse than subcutaneous injections, which is now, in the vast majority of men that tolerate that, the best way to administer TRT.
Apart from with Sustanon, I would add in there because it really stings if you try it with Sustanon. At least it did for me, and I think for a lot of men because of the benzyl alcohol and the propionate in it. What were your kind of initial effects from the starting TRT? We talked about maybe 2 to 3 days, but longer, maybe in the first 3 months.
The first 3 months, I immediately noticed that without a significant change to my training or diet, I was already lifting 3 to 4 days a week, compound lifts, focusing on progressive overload, eating in a caloric surplus. So I was already gaining weight and adding weight to the bar and training in a way that was conducive to building muscle and getting stronger. But even with all that in place, I immediately noticed that my results just tripled overnight, essentially. I say overnight, within the first few months, to the point where I just completely broke through all of my plateaus and I was plateauing at weights that, in relation to my body weight and my time lifting, I should have been breezing through. You know, they call it the newbie gains or the novice gains, and mine stalled out very quickly. That was one of the first things I noticed. Not only did my results come quicker, but my energy in the gym itself, my ability to actually perform to my ability within that session also improved. So those were 2 main things. The other thing that I noticed quite quickly is that my erectile function had improved. A lot of men are quite reluctant to disclose these things, that, you know, they do have erectile issues, and it can be embarrassing for a lot of men. That was one of the big things I noticed too, that my erectile strength came back. And then I think the only other thing is that my ability to relax came back. I'm not sure if it was because I was actually able to train harder or whatnot, but I used to feel on edge quite a lot at night, never really sit back, relax, just lie in my bed, watch TV or something like that. I would always feel a little anxious and a little on edge. That was the other thing I noticed in the short term, that I could just go home, sit down, relax, fall asleep, and I would wake up refreshed and recovered to do it all again, as opposed to sitting there on edge, then getting a crappy 6 hours sleep, constantly having that low level fatigue state.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely empathize with that. I mean, I definitely had anxiety when I had low testosterone. Background level of anxiety pretty much the whole time. I wouldn't say I was depressed, but I was heading that way, kind of low mood. And, you know, when you're not sleeping and you've got low mood, and then eventually you stop going to the gym, and then you're putting on weight. It's only so long until everything starts falling apart, I think. And I was certainly on that trajectory. I think that's the same for a lot of men that we speak to, because a lot of men don't even know they have this. I was quite lucky in that I realized within a couple of years. I'm not exactly sure of your timeline, Tom, but it sounds like it's similar, kind of quite quick that you realize. Some men will be like this for 8-9 years before they realize. Some people don't realize ever. You know, and they just kind of deal with it. They've never either seek the right advice or sought the right advice, or they've been told incorrectly that they're okay and there's nothing wrong there, or take some antidepressants. But yeah, I definitely had anxiety and depression, and I think that was another thing that I noticed. Social anxiety that I used to have in terms of going into a group of people. I used to have quite bad social anxiety, now I think about it. And that disappeared for me almost overnight, which was incredible, because you would think that that would be something that you have to kind of build yourself up to. But no, it was almost like it just disappeared, and I wasn't overthinking things anymore. I was like, oh, I'll just go and talk to those people. And not just that, but just general anxiety and kind of being on edge. Definitely I suffered from that as well. So I think in the first 3 months, I noticed all of those kind of things improved. And I had the exact same thing as you in terms of having energy in the gym, putting on muscle quite quickly, because we know testosterone increases your muscle mass. I was on about 0.5 milliliter of Sustanon a week when I started. dysregulated, it does have a big impact, because really on that kind of level, you've got a higher testosterone level than most people. So, and it definitely translates to putting on muscle in the gym. Obviously, that's not the main reason for going on TRT. It certainly helps with that. I think those were the main things that I noticed, really. The other big thing was sleeping. I would just fall asleep within 10 minutes, which was completely unheard of for me. I hadn't done that since I was very young. I couldn't remember the last time I'd fallen asleep in 10 minutes. And that obviously carries over to having much better rest, better sleep. You can wake up earlier. You can get more done in the morning. You don't feel groggy and terrible in the morning. You're able to talk to people. You're able to do your job properly.
Yeah, and I think that is predominantly because of testosterone's quite potent anti-stress effects. It allows you to actually face adversity and not only face it, but recover from it much quicker too. And that's predominantly thought to be because the primary steroid hormone of your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight system, is cortisol. It's essentially break down your tissue in times of stress to be used immediately. But obviously, testosterone and cortisol are antagonists. Testosterone builds tissue and cortisol breaks it down. You need times of both anabolism and catabolism. When you are chronically deficient in testosterone, your actual ability to recover from and resist stress diminishes because testosterone is the primary glucocorticoid receptor antagonist. When you do put testosterone back in, that confidence and stress resilience and ability to actually go into a social situation that you know would usually give you anxiety, but be able to resist that is again because on the cellular level, your body's actual ability to resist stress has been restored.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting putting it back to the actual biology of it. As so many of our patients as well can see the actual benefits that they experience day in, day out, and how that can relate to what we see in the biology and the actual impact of testosterone physiologically.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, obviously, mechanistic theory like that doesn't always translate across into the real world, but mechanisms like testosterone's antagonism to cortisol are extraordinarily well documented, and that particular mechanism is elucidated very well in the literature.
So, I mean, we've talked a lot about the benefits. Let's talk about side effects, because as with all treatments and all medicines, even something that's naturally occurring like testosterone, there can be side effects. I would say that all of our patients, pretty much all of them, will notice something. So I would say the main ones I started noticing early on, and this was because my protocol wasn't great, probably the same for you, Tom. I was on Sustanon 0.5 ml a week. That's 125 milligrams per week, which is more than the average, more than even the top men produce per week, I would say. I was noticing that I was getting acne. So I was getting quite greasy skin and quite a few spots, particularly around my shoulders and back, and more on my forehead than I would have had previously. You think about teenagers when they're going through that period of the hormones going up and down, and you're definitely producing more testosterone around that period of time. It's basically the same thing. I think if you've got a large amount of testosterone, it increases your sebaceous gland output, which makes the skin oily, and then you start to get more spots. Some men actually get cysts. I would say I don't have that now because my dose is better and I'm not doing once a week injection of Sustanon, which causes a big spike in testosterone and estrogen, and then it tends to wear off by the end of the week. There's a way of getting around it. That's the kind of take home from that. Most guys who have that kind of issue, I would say 90% of them, it's because their dose is not correct. Some men are just more prone to it, but in general, I would say it's because their dosing is not correct. You shouldn't be experiencing that as a man who's 25 plus, really.
Yeah, I think it can be quite common for that to start, even if you are on a proper protocol per se, for the first month or 2 months of treatment, because you haven't undergone that huge fluctuation. Realistically, it shouldn't be happening at all, although it is doable at the start. And if it's persisting 3, 4, 5, 6 months or beyond into treatment, then yeah, it definitely is a sign that your current protocol isn't correct for your physiology.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing is there's a lot of clinics that are still using this protocol. Once a week injection of Sustanon, or even worse, a whole 250 milligram injection every 2 weeks, or even worse than that is 250 milligrams every 3 to 4 weeks, which is what I think the NHS has normally recommended. Actually, I think once every 2 weeks is more frequent than the NHS normally provide.
I speak to a lot of guys that are coming to us because they've started treatment with the NHS, and the most common protocol that they come in on is 1,000 milligram of Nebido every 12 weeks. After that, it is 250 milligrams Sustanon every 3 weeks. They're literally just reading the packet insert, seeing that it says start on 250 every 3 weeks. If they don't do well, move it to every 2 weeks. And they're just completely disregarded the pharmacokinetics and basic physiology in favor of a packet insert, because that's what it is.
Well, it seems to me that the only reason they have put that in the packet insert, as far as I can tell, unless they're completely incompetent, which I'm sure they're not, is that it allowed them to sell it to the NHS as a means of providing injections which aren't being done once a week. NHS doctors don't want to be doing injections for patients once a week. We'll do the injection for you. You come to us, we'll do the injection for you. I reckon that's why they said, oh yeah, you can do one of these injections every 3 weeks. It'll work perfectly. And we've split it up into 4 esters and that'll make it better for some reason. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to me why you would say that.
I think it's predominantly, like you said, they want to administer the testosterone at the doctor's office because they're horrified of men potentially abusing them, which abusing testosterone for, performance benefits, which the vast majority of men don't do and wouldn't do. They just want to feel normal again. And then, yes, they were just looking for ways to inject less frequently. And the idea was that you have the 4 different esters, 2 shorter, 1 medium. As one's wearing off, the other kicks in. That's an idea that was built in the marketing department rather than on any actual physiological basis.
Well, they tested it themselves. And they found that the average testosterone level in nanomoles per litre was 76 nanomoles per litre after 3 days. 76 nanomoles per litre, that's 3 times a high natural testosterone level. And then they even said, I think after 2 weeks, it had dropped down to, I think it was 8 point something nanomoles per litre. It may have been after 3 weeks. I guess they could argue that by 2 weeks, if it was dropping to 8.6, it's still within range. But how you can justify having a testosterone level 3 times natural, 3 times a normal natural level is beyond me, really. Not expect to see any side effects from that. I mean, moving on, we could talk about Sustanon all day as well. We'll do a video on that at some point. Other kind of side effects that I noticed, and again, linked to this, was a raised estrogen level. So I went from having good confidence and no anxiety, etc., to noticing that my anxiety was kind of increasing a little bit, and possibly that I was a bit bloated in the face as well. It became quite clear that my estrogen level was raised. Another sure sign of that is if you start welling up when you're watching TV commercials, which I definitely had once or twice, where you start feeling like you're going to start crying at some stupid TV advert. Really stemmed from the fact that I was on the Sustanon and I was getting a big spike in testosterone. That was converting more into estrogen. Some guys get itchy nipples, even gynecomastia, which is when they get breast tissue growth. It can increase your blood pressure. It can cause swelling around the ankles, which is something that I had as well. That can impact how your heart's pumping. It's not ideal having a high estrogen. Also not ideal having a very low estrogen. I don't want to get into the aromatase inhibitor argument today because that's another long video. For most guys, if you're a good body weight, you can normally maintain a good estrogen level without aromatase inhibitors. But some guys will need them if they want to be on a decent dose of testosterone, which improves their symptoms. There are other ways, but again, we shouldn't really get into that now. But yeah, I'd say high estrogen is another big kind of side effect of Starting Trt. But again, it's easy to adjust your dose and frequency to prevent that from being an issue long term.
Yeah, definitely. And that was predominantly the primary side effect that I experienced at first. About a month in, I just noticed that I wasn't getting actual glandular growth, actual gynecomastia, but I was getting inflammation behind my nipple, a bit itchy and a bit sore. Even if you don't actually have gynecomastia yet, just that starting can be rather stressful because you know that theoretically it could develop into actual gynecomastia. So that was the main thing I noticed. I also got the water retention too, which comes hand in hand with the raised estrogen. That's predominantly because estrogen stimulates the activation of the system in your body that regulates blood pressure through retention of sodium. It's called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Interestingly, testosterone also activates it too. They can be quite synergistic in that respect. And some men can still, even with a controlled estrogen, they will notice improvements for the first few months or so, even if their estrogen isn't particularly high. You can still notice a little bit of water retention, which for the vast majority of people does balance out without any need for aromatase inhibitors. Because sometimes you can get, a chap will have been on treatment for 6, 7, 8 weeks and they have quite a few different side effects. You get their 6-week bloods back and the doctor looks at them and there's nothing inherently wrong with them. Their testosterone's at a great place.
Yeah.
Their estrogen isn't raised. Their prolactin isn't raised. Thyroid's fine. And in that case, you just need to give it time, especially if you're one of the cases where you've had low testosterone for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Undergoing such a rapid and large change to your physiology can mean that, it takes 3, 4, 5 months to balance out. And we see that all the time. Chaps who have some quite unpleasant symptoms at the start, their blood work's fine. The doctor keeps them on the same protocol, just tells them to give it a little time, which is hard to hear if you've got side effects, being told that you just need to wait out whatever you're going through at the minute. It's not pleasant. As humans, we inherently feel better if we're actively doing something, but it is very common that all of those problems, water retention, bit of nipple itchiness, things like that, just resolve on their own, particularly if the blood work's looking fine too. But yeah, those were the two main things that I experienced. And I would say that is what most guys complain of at the start.
Yeah, definitely the case that we've seen guys with normal estrogen levels getting a little bit of swelling here and there, and it seems to dissipate quite quickly over a few weeks. So going on to other potential side effects, I think another big one is hair loss. I've definitely noticed that it's accelerated, and obviously you don't necessarily start losing hair when you're in your early, mid-20s, but when you get to early 30s, it's quite common to start losing your hair. So I don't know how much it's accelerated it, but I feel like it probably has a little bit. Again, it's something that you can reduce. Finasteride pills is the most common one, but there's a risk of it causing side effects that can be irreversible for some guys. So we tend to steer clear of those, but we do have a spray of finasteride, which doesn't go into your bloodstream quite as much. And for me, it seems to be helping quite a bit. It's definitely reduced kind of hair loss. I think I've even grown back some hair follicles. So it's not the end of the world. If you're really prone to losing your hair anyway, it might be the case it makes it a bit worse and that you're just going to lose your hair, unfortunately. And in those kind of cases, it's probably true that you would be losing your hair anyway.
It's just accelerating what you were genetically predisposed to anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And I went through the same thing. I mean, I've grown my hair back now, but typically I just shave my head. On treatment, I pretty quickly start getting a bit of recession, but more so just diffuse thinning. And, like everyone's going to cross that bridge where they say, if they do experience it, do I want to go down the treatment route or do I want to just accept it and shave? And for me, I just chose the latter. I'm not judging anyone. If it means a lot to them, then, go ahead. But for me, it felt somewhat counterintuitive to take a systemic 5-alpha reductase inhibitor and remove DHT when the whole point of TRT is to increase your androgens because they are associated with feel-good factors for men's sexual function, energy, things like that. So I just felt, why am I taking something to increase my testosterone and then remove the most potent androgen in the body? But again, that's just my stance on it. And I understand that people have different stances. But yeah, hair loss was, I'd say about 2 years in, I noticed that when I would dry my hair in the shower, I would always get like strands of hair in my mouth when I was rubbing my hair and then dry my face. And then about a year of noticing that, I was like, wow, it is getting a bit thin. I've drawn it back now, but to be honest, that's more so just laziness because shaving your head every day with a razor gets a bit tedious after doing it for a year.
Thanks a lot for watching our video today. Drop us a like and write any comments below. Any questions about starting TRT, any personal experiences. I think we've covered the main kind of benefits and potential side effects that most men see on TRT, but there might be some other ones that you want to discuss with us. Also, if you've got any ideas for follow-up videos, anything that you'd like to see us talk about, then drop us a comment below and we'll have a think about which ones we're going to talk about next. If you're interested in TRT, then head over to optimal.co.uk and you can call us. You might even be talking to Tom about either getting started on TRT or if you want advice from one of the doctors about the current protocol you're on and ways of switching over to a better protocol with Optimal as an example. We also sell the hair loss spray if you're interested in a hair loss solution that isn't the Finasteride pills, which can cause some problems. So I hope you found that enjoyable and interesting, and we'll speak to you next time.